Okay, so we're back for part 2 of Steven Crowder's Barbershop appearance, and we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. I do want to start with a stat on white people being 12 times more likely to kill a black person than a black person to kill a white person. I'm going to play a clip where they address that.
I say this, it's not a challenge, but I got to ask you, you got to tell me these sources where you're getting this 12 times more likely a black man killing a white person. I got to know that, not because it's contradictory, but because I like to have facts. Give me the source.
I'll give them to you. Yeah, when we do it, we always give a QR code where you can see all of them. These are coming from either the FBI or
Now,
DOJ.
you say QR code to see, and that's a blind.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I don't know. I'll have to print it on Braille and ship it. By the way,
So that was a nice way to unintentionally lighten the tension in the room because they're talking about really heavy topics as far as race, what the dynamics are in America between white people and black people. So I really like that they were just able to laugh at that because obviously he just kind of misspoke there without realizing what he was actually saying. Anyway, so in both videos, part 1 and part 2, Crowder does link to his sources, and at the very bottom you can see the source for the 12 times more likely stat, and it's coming from the FBI, and it's coming from data from 2019, and I will add that on the screen. And basically there's one number which is 566, and then the other number is 246, and I put this into ChatGPT to figure out how exactly they were getting this 12 times more likely number. And according to ChatGPT, what they're doing is they're taking those two numbers and then they are dividing it by the population, but it said that they're doing it incorrectly. They're doing it by the population of the offender versus the victim, which is why I guess the number is higher and lower in the opposite direction. And so that's what ChatGPT says about that. But I know that people are going to debate the incorrect stat, and then people are still going to debate the correct stat when you provide it. And so it does seem to be a argument that is just going to go in circles. But if you are someone who cares about the numbers, definitely go and look it up for yourself so that you know what the truth is regardless of what other people are telling you. Next up, I want to get into this slide story. So Steven Crowder is going to tell a story about an interaction that he had with his family while they were at some amusement park. They did block out the name, so I'm not sure which amusement park, but we can go ahead and listen to him tell this story.
my kids are 3. And this happened not once, but about 4 or 5 times. And it happened 3 times with one black kid who was about 5 or 6. Shoved my son out of the way to get on the water slide. Okay? My son did nothing. Shoved him out of the way a second time, came back. My son's 2, 3 years, which is a big deal at that point. And then at one point I look over, Mom, no Dad. And I just go like, hey, he's being aggressive. Okay, he comes back the 3rd time. Separate, I go, hey, hold on, you have to wait in line. You know what my son said? My son said, well, Daddy, maybe he's in a real hurry. We should let him go.
I want to pause it here because there's a few things that he said. So a lot of people didn't like that he pointed out that the mom was without a dad or did not have a husband. And so the implication there is that he's saying that no man is around because he abandoned the family. Like there's this negative perception that is being implied because the father is not there. Other people are saying, hey, the dad could be at work, he could be busy, whatever. He could be in the picture, but just not there for that particular family event, right? And so one thing I want to point to is because he's talking about his son's reaction, and his son's reaction is really innocent. Like, it's just, you can tell that from what he says his son is saying, that his son didn't internalize what was happening. He was just like, oh, just let him go because he's in a rush. Like, he was thinking about it very innocently. And you can have situations where parents see what happened and they react to the situation, or they react how they want to react to the situation, and they force that on the child. And so there was a situation where I think some basketball player, his daughter was in the middle of a game, there was somebody guarding her aggressively or doing something crazy, whatever, and the mom did not like that, and I think the mom from the stand told the daughter to punch that other girl. And so the daughter is being pressured to behave like that. We don't know if the daughter would have actually done that. And so in this situation, you can see how Crowder is saying that his son is reacting, and then it's Crowder who is really upset about the interaction, right? And so it's not like his son, from what we are hearing, it's not like his son came to him and said, hey, Daddy, why is that boy treating me like that? I don't like that. His son is not upset about the situation. His son is not crying over it. It just seems like his son is unbothered and doesn't care. And so I just found that really interesting.
That was a different interaction. That kid kept doing it to every other, and it wasn't the only one. And you know why? Because I've taught my kid, hey, you're going to have people who look different from you, and it doesn't matter. You treat them well.
So the ending of that clip was great because he is saying, hey, people look different from you, treat them well. And that is what everyone should be teaching their kids. You should obviously educate your kids about potential situations that they may face because they're a boy, because they're a girl, because they're white, because they're black. But at the end of the day, you should be teaching them to have respect for other people and to only defend themselves when absolutely necessary, or when they feel unsafe, they're threatened. They shouldn't be the aggressor for no reason, if that makes sense. And so obviously this kid that he's talking about is in the wrong. It sounds like he said that this kid was doing that to other people and that it happened to his son multiple times. And so obviously this is bad parenting on that boy's mother, being that the dad wasn't there. It's on the mother to watch your kids, see what's happening, and then correct the bad behavior. And so I just want to reiterate that he's talking about how situations like this will make kids racist, but it's also the parents' reaction to the situation and what they're doing, because the kid is going to see how you react. They are going to internalize whatever Steven Crowder, whatever that other mom does in this situation. And so it's not just what the kid's initial reaction to something is, it's what the adults around him do. The kids are going to internalize that, and then the next time that happens, they're going to remember those feelings and then they're going to act. But it would be completely different if Crowder's son on his own initially was upset about what the kid was doing to him, and it didn't sound like that was the case. Okay, moving on, we're going to play a clip of them talking about separating the races, and they're just really trying to dig into why there is this vibe that white people do not allow black people in the black community to be successful.
How did y'all come and burn down the Wall Street, Black Wall Street? We had our thing going. Why is it an issue when we have our own thing going and we're minding our business? White America comes in and figure out a reason to, oh, that's wrong. Y'all are doing something wrong. That's not by the code. That's not by the rules.
No one here's trying.
I want to pause it right here because this is super important, because this example of Black Wall Street comes up a lot, and the pushback that I hear to this is, oh, well, Black Wall Street, that wasn't nothing, that didn't really exist. And I think what people are really trying to say is that it wasn't the same as the actual Wall Street, like the banking center in New York. So they're trying to say that it was more small scale and it wasn't that big of a deal. That's why it doesn't really matter that this area burned down. It's not as affluent or rich or successful as people are making it out to be based on that Black Wall Street title. And what's important to note about that is, even if you think that Black Wall Street wasn't that big of a deal, it did mean something to the people at the time. It was a pillar in the black community for those specific people, and to have someone come in and ruin it, regardless of what the reason was, that obviously is going to have a huge impact. So it's not really what outsiders or other people think about that area, it's what it means to the people who live in that area, in that community, who are proud of whatever they've accomplished. And so you don't get to diminish that just because you don't think it was that big of a deal. If you don't see the value in Black Wall Street and what that community meant to black people, that's totally fine, but you also shouldn't downplay it just because you don't think that it was a significant accomplishment for the black community at that time.
To justify clear racist policies, the past, or racism of the past, of course that existed. No one was arguing that.
I want to pause it here because it's really good that they acknowledge, like, hey, this is racist. Nobody is defending that. No one is excusing that, because there are a lot of people who are making comments that I said, basically saying because the area didn't matter or it wasn't that big of a deal, it doesn't matter that they burned down the area, when actually it doesn't. So they are not defending that, and they are not excusing it, and they are acknowledging that that happened.
We're not arguing. I'm saying why.
It sounds like you're saying that you would want racial segregation, because you're saying.
I don't want racial segregation. We asked for equality. We didn't get that.
But you're saying your own community doing your own thing.
Do our own thing.
Are you saying that we should be separate communities? That's what I'm asking. Are you saying we should be separate white and black communities? That's what it sounds like a little bit.
Separation may be the answer.
Okay.
So I don't agree with this. I think that you can have your own areas that are naturally black, naturally white, but I don't think you should have forced segregation to where you can only live in this area, and if you try to live somewhere else, that's a big no-no, and you're going to get in legal trouble. So if you want to live in an all-black neighborhood, if you want to live in an all-white neighborhood, that should be fine, but it shouldn't be forced on you. It shouldn't be a legal requirement that you live with people who share the same skin color as you, who share the same race as you. And one thing that didn't come up in this clip, but when they're having this conversation, they talked about how the guy in the hat, he was saying segregation may be the answer. And what came up was that he was saying that Black people and white people should be separated, but he didn't like that the motivation was, oh, we want to get away from white people because they're violent. And obviously Black people can say the same thing about white people are violent, whatever, right? And so the argument goes both ways, but it's just the framing. Like if you say, hey, I just want to live around Black people who share my culture, who share my values, and that's fine because there's a positive spin on it. But when you frame it like, oh, I want to get away from X group because they're chaotic, they're crazy, their food smells, whatever, then that's when you're kind of making unnecessary comment, when you can just really spin it the other way and just say something positive towards your community and why you want to be around people who look like you. Okay, moving on, they talked about taxes and reparations, so we can play that clip.
Since a lot of people don't care about their taxes, add an extra 2% to what you pay in taxes. How about that? 2%. That's a number.
2% for how long?
Let's see. How long it was?
So 2% only for white people who have a connection to slavery at their forefathers, right?
How long were we in slavery?
You'd end up with no money.
200 and...
You'd end up with zero.
Okay, I want to pause it here because this is super interesting. So I think most people know that the UK paid reparations to slave owners when they ended slavery. So what I want to go back to is that reparations should have been given to Black people in 1865. The real issue is that nobody wanted to part with their wealth because then that means that they literally would have to sell their house, sell whatever other forms of asset that they had at that time in order to make Black people whole. And so understandably, nobody really wants to sacrifice or give up what they have in order to repay other people, even if it's the right thing to do. And so with the UK, they ended slavery in 1833. In 1835, they took out a $20 million loan, I believe. Let me double check that. They took out a $20 million loan. It's going to be in pound. A £20 million loan to repay former slave owners, and they started that in 1835 and they finished it in 2015. So if you have the UK doing that, think about that, 1835 to 2015. There are people who probably had nothing to do with slavery in the UK who were paying taxes, say between 1980 to 2015, right? People in our society in America could be in that same boat where they feel like they're paying taxes for something that they had no involvement in and their ancestors didn't. But regardless, everyone in the UK has to pay that tax in order to make whole people who lost their slaves in 1835. And so obviously, people in America, the people who were in power at the time, they could have done the same thing if they didn't want to part with all of their wealth in order to make Black people whole. They could have taken out a loan from the government in order to make Black people whole, but they did not want to do that. And so now we're just having to start that conversation. You can see how long it took them from 1835 to 2015 to pay that off. And so in that clip, they're talking about how long did it take to pay that off. And you can obviously see that you're not going to get that in your lifetime. Maybe your grandchildren, your great-grandkids may see more of that money than you will. So I do agree with him that you're not going to see much of that money just because not so little is going to come out, but you're really just going to be getting a little bit of money at a time. You're not going to get a lump sum because a lump sum is what would make a difference, not like these monthly, annually kind of payments, right? And so I think that is important to note that this is something that you can do. You just have to be able to talk about this and actually implement it.
Zero money. You'd each end up with about $14.99.
You keep letting our people off the hook.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm talking about the government paying taxes. I'm not talking about just people who are responsible. Once again, I'm not responsible for anything happening in Ukraine, but I'm paying for it.
I agree.
So why should that rationale not transfer to this?
Because it's rationale.
It's not when the government. It's not when the.
I don't think it's issue rationale. Like people in the UK did it. We're paying for things that we have nothing to do with as it relates to Israel. So you can absolutely just add this to the plate.
United States is the purpose. The people who perpetrate.
Well, that's why I need to ask the number, because if you're talking about more than $15 per Black person, you're talking about trillions of dollars.
Right, but if we're going to be a part of the same country, like Lane said, we're going to all be a part and members of the same country. Well, we have to take on what comes with that. What comes with that is historically, every time like Chris said earlier, every time Black people have achieved en masse, it's been torn down.
No.
And then you get to a point
Unless you're
where
talking about the riots, yeah.
Then you get to a point where you're like, I can mention there's several black communities that's under lakes. There's one that's under Central Park in New York.
Okay, so there are a few good comments here. One crowder pointed out the riots. Well, that was really, if he's talking about the 2020 George Floyd riots, that was black people burning down their own neighborhoods foolishly. The other thing that they pointed out was that money should come from the government as far as reparation. I did see a comment where someone was saying that, and then somebody else replied saying, well, the government money that comes from you, the taxpayers, so you are paying into reparations for black people if it were to come from the government. I do agree that corporations that benefited from slavery should also be responsible for their share of reparation. And then the other thing that they pointed out was the fact that there are some black communities that are under lakes, and there's a whole YouTube video about this where basically there are different areas of black communities that were doing well, that were thriving, and there was some government plan to kind of, I guess, reroute water so that something else could benefit, and that meant that town would now be underwater. And so that's really wild and fascinating when you think about that and when you hear about that. So I do recommend searching for that video on YouTube just to see what actually happened there. And so again, this just goes back to not allowing black people to succeed, ruining their communities, burning it down, flooding it with water, all of that stuff. And so it's pretty crazy. The other thing that came up was, I think this was a little bit later on, where basically there was this idea of stay away from us, but you need to pay us back for our contributions to the founding of this country, basically, right? And so Steve was saying that that's hypocritical. You can't tell people to stay away from you, but then also want their money. And I think you can, because again, reparations, this is not a new thing. This is something that has been talked about going back to 1865, and it should have happened already. And the thing that I want to point to is that what Stephen Carter brings up is how do you sit down this white person and tell him he has to pay for something that he had nothing to do? And so that's a little bit of emotional manipulation, because you're not sitting down any one person to tell them, hey, you have to pay for reparation. All you have to do is say, hey, we owe a debt to black people for slavery. You're not personally responsible, but white people, America as a country, we're responsible for making sure that those people are whole. And that's all there is to it. You don't have to imply or make white people feel bad that this debt is owed. You can just say, hey, we have to pay it back. That's all there is to it. You don't need to think badly of yourself because of it, especially if you had nothing to do with it and you have ancestors who have nothing to do with that. You just understand that this is what it means to be an American. And I'm sure the UK people, they probably might have complained about taxes, but again, that was written to law. You have to pay it, whatever. And I don't know if they think twice about it, but that is interesting when you think about how they handle that. And obviously they paid the slave owners, not the slaves, but in America, you would be paying the slaves that money. And I do think it's crazy that people think that reparations is not owed, regardless of whether or not we actually get it. I think it's crazy that people think it's not owed, because nobody today would work 6 months to a year with no pay at all. You would probably have people stop showing up for their job. And we do have a government shutdown right now. People aren't getting paid. And so you do have some people not showing up for their job because they want to be paid. They have bills and all of that stuff, right? And so I think that just from a human common sense level, you should understand that people want to be and deserve to be paid for the work that they contributed. And obviously, just like the rich people today who pass down their wealth to their descendants, black people should have been given the opportunity to do the same, especially early on in America's founding. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about crimes, and this is where they get into a tricky conversation about why black people commit crimes and the kinds of crimes that white people commit.
I'm trying to find some common ground, because that white kid...
And I'm trying to tell you, you're trying to start the starting point right here when you're not factoring in what happened to get that kid in that low-income, impoverished environment that created the criminal that he ended up being.
Oh my God, this is what we do. It's not crime, it's poverty. Then why do poor white people not commit violent crime at the same rate?
They do.
No, they don't.
It's just usually different types of crime.
No, they do not.
They do.
It's a fact, dude.
Y'all just shovel them all
They
in the
just
trailer
different
park,
types.
right?
Yeah, they just different types of crime. And then they go off.
All people commit crimes. You can say that one group of people commit crimes more than others. Black people commit crimes onto other black people the most. But I also think that you can't just say only one group is committing crimes and nobody else. And you also can't downplay the types of crimes that other races commit, because we know that there's white collar crime and then there's also, I guess, blue collar crime, whatever violent crimes are called. That's just something that people don't talk about a lot, because if you watch that TV show The Ozarks, which is like the drug crime family, there are people out in the mountains or wherever the Ozarks is, and they were legit running drug businesses. Like, obviously they're not super flashy, they're living out there in the country, but they're involved in committing crimes. So it just looks different out there in the country, in the mountains, whatever, but people are still committing crime. It's just talked about and seen differently than it is in urban areas where there's a high foot traffic, everybody's recording, all of that stuff. Like, obviously people are not going to be out there recording crazy stuff in the mountains and all of that stuff, because one, a lot less people, and are they really into that? Are they going to be on their phones and doing crazy stuff like they would in the big cities? Completely different environment, completely different lifestyle, and I think that that is why crime is talked about differently depending on where you live and who commits the crime. Now, the other thing that came up was this idea of people being in jail for stuff that they didn't commit, and there are black people who are in jail for petty crimes like weed and all of that stuff, and so Crowder is pushing back on that, because the guy who's in the chair with the dreads, he's basically like, people are in jail for small things, and obviously drugs is not a small thing, because if you're selling like crazy drugs like fentanyl and all of that stuff, that obviously has a chain reaction because that impacts other people. It's different if you're just taking drugs and it's just you and you're not affecting everybody else, but when you're selling that and distributing it, that has very different implications. Next up, let's talk about immigration and manual labor. So this is just a really wild take, so we can just go ahead and play it.
Slavery, because that's what that is. That's modern slavery. That's modern slavery.
They should be paid more for the work. That's hard work, man.
They shouldn't be here illegally.
Somebody got to get that cabbage out there. Somebody got to get them sweet potatoes out the ground. Somebody got to do that. White people not going to do that.
Of course we will.
Once again, when the work got hard, that's when they went and got slaves.
Yeah, white people don't know hard work.
The Indians broke down. They went and got black people. They got the Chinese. They conned them in doing the railroad, like you said. But then when white work get hard, white people ran from that kind of work. So you can't tell me in 2025 you gonna go find one of them new generation of.
That was pretty funny, because what he's saying, there is some kind of truth to that, and I'll say it in a more general way than how he said it. I believe that when you're younger, there are certain types of jobs that you will do that you won't do when you're older or when you have more money. So typically how it used to be is that you would see the teenagers and all of that stuff in the fast food places working kind of weird, odd jobs, and that was how those industries survived. And then once they got older, once they made more money, they started working different jobs, but they would be replaced by the teenagers and the younger people who came after them, right? And so I think that what happens is that you might have white people who move out of those jobs faster, whereas you may have black people stay in those jobs longer. In New York City especially, I saw a lot of black people working in customer service or working in retail. I don't think that white people aren't working those jobs. They just move out of those jobs faster into corporate, higher paying jobs and all of that stuff. And that's not to say that black people can't do that. I just think that black people stay in those jobs longer than white people do. And then he does have a point, because if you're saying that America was founded by white people for white people, but you have a bunch of other different racial groups doing the building of your country, it doesn't matter if you were the one who put together the blueprints, drew the plans, whatever, you still made other people do the physical labor, right? And Steve does have a good point. This is just modern slavery when you're bringing other people in. Yes, you're paying them, so it's different from how African slaves were treated. They were not paid, so you're bringing in these immigrants and you're paying them very cheap wages in order to do these jobs. So it's just modern day slavery, and if you have a history of being enslaved, you shouldn't be okay with that in a sense, because you understand the generational trauma that comes from that. But it's very different when you get paid for the work that you do and you're willing to do that work, right? It's not that black people were unwilling to plant or grow things. They were just forced to do that for somebody else's benefit. And the other thing that Steve brought up was that when you bring in immigrants to do cheap labor, that does affect the wages of everybody else in America. And he was talking about how some plant, they got rid of immigrants, they sent them back home, whatever, and then there was a line around the block or whatever for Americans wanting to work those jobs. So you can see the downside of immigrants. They're taking jobs from Americans, and then you can also see that Americans also are growing out of those jobs and moving on to better opportunities. Moving on, let's talk about HBCUs, and they're going to talk about the two guys who went to debate at TCU, and we can just listen to them talk about it.
Men that went to Tennessee State set up in Charlie's, in his model, his MO, we want to have the debate. Illegal aliens got to do this, and DEI got to do this. Now, why would you go to a black college, which Charlie didn't do? That wasn't his thing. He was going to big PWIs, go and sit down with the big schools. Why would these two guys go now, with the country in the state of upheaval that it is, go sit on this campus?
I actually want to pause it here because Charlie didn't go to black schools to my knowledge, but he went to schools where they didn't like him or were less likely to agree with him, even though he did have a huge fan base. The point that he's arguing is fair, but I also think that it doesn't help his case because it's not like Charlie was going to schools to debate people who were on his side and who really, really liked him and weren't going to taunt him, chase him off the campus, all of that crazy stuff, right? And so he does have a point, but I think it's not a fair comparison because Charlie was debating people who did not agree with him in most cases.
With no permits.
With no permits to go have a debate with people that didn't know they were coming.
Why is that a problem?
It's a problem because, number one, you didn't get the permit. You didn't even go the proper route to do it. But secondly,
you knew what that was going to do.
At the time that
what is it going to do?
You were going to incite.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys caught it, but Steven Crowder was like, why is that a problem that they didn't have a permit? I looked this up, and basically you get a permit to reserve space and time, and then also if you have like a megaphone, a speaker, whatever, right? And so with the public schools, they can't really deny your First Amendment right to be on the campus, but typically the right thing to do is to get a permit. And then also he was saying that the two guys who went to the HBCU, they were doing that to incite violence, and I don't think they were doing that to incite violence. They were doing that to spark debate. Those are two different things because really what we all want to do is have a conversation with other people, hear different ideas, opposing ideas, and have a conversation that does lead to violence, but I don't think that they were doing that to incite violence. I think they just wanted to get people to talk to them, and they found controversial ways to get those conversations started, and they didn't necessarily have to be chased off of campus. You just don't debate them, ignore them, don't give them any attention. And so I do find that interesting that they are saying that this is a problem because Charlie Kirk didn't go to black colleges and do this, but he was debating people who didn't think like him, who wanted to have a debate with him just so that they could say that they debated Charlie Kirk, all of that, right? And so I don't think it's a bad thing that they went to a black school. Like, why are you ignoring the black schools? Why are you not debating with black people and hearing their ideas, hearing their thoughts and their opinions on different issues? Because if you're only talking to white people, you don't know what the other side thinks if you are a white person. So I don't think there's anything wrong with going to HBCUs. Just get your permit, announce your event, and see who shows up and have genuine conversations with those people. I also really love the example that Steven shared of how he spoke to a black lady at one of these schools and how she was saying, like, I'm only here because of affirmative action. And what she really means is that I have the grades, I'm doing well, and this affirmative action is giving me a chance. And then Steven Crowder, ignoring what I just said, Steven Crowder is like, well, what are your SATs? What are your GPA? Oh, your scores are really high. You deserve to be here. And so there's just a slight difference in framing. And so I personally, again, would never talk about myself and say, hey, I'm only here because of affirmative action. I'm only here because of DEI. I would affirm myself and I would talk about whatever it was that got me there, my grades, my basketball talent, whatever, right? It's not someone else giving me a handout, if that makes sense. Now, the other thing that they talked about in relation to HBCUs is they talked about how several HBCUs got threats the next day after Charlie was assassinated. And in my first video talking about this, like the day of, on September 10th, I was wondering how people would react if it was said that the shooter was black. And so I'm not really surprised that HBCUs got threats the next day because I'm sure some people thought, hey, a black person probably did that, especially with people saying that he's racist, he's sexist, and all of that stuff, right? And so you're really at that point trying to figure out who did that and why, and you're going to look at those different things that people are saying about Charlie Kirk to see who may be responsible. So we can just go ahead and play the clip of them talking about this.
How so? I don't know. I'm not familiar with it.
That was the information put out. We received a threat to the campus relating to the Charlie Kirk incident, and we're shutting campus down. And it was 6 different HBCUs the next day that got the same threat.
But do you mean related to someone who would be agreeing with the shooter's ideology or Charlie Kirk's?
I don't really know why that matters. The point is that HBCUs were getting threats over what happened, and obviously it's because they possibly think that a black person was responsible for this, and obviously no one had any idea who did it, so they're going to be making guesses. And if you are someone who is, oh, let me get my revenge, let me get my get back, whatever, you are going to target who you think is responsible for this. And also it could have just been someone playing on racial tension and wanting to further up the temperature by having this headline go out that HBCUs were being threatened and all of that stuff. And so I do find it interesting that Crowder didn't know about this, especially being that he's debating people in the black community. So if you're going to go to the black community with concerns that white people have, you should also understand what's happening currently in the black community, because we're really just talking about slavery and like the aftermath of slavery, but there's also recent stuff that's going on that he should have been more aware of going into this conversation, so that when he is hearing about this or he already knows about this, he has a more appropriate response to what that feels like to be threatened for something that you have no involvement in, and then you feel like you have to defend yourself. On the flip side, I do want to acknowledge that because he does say, well, churches had to close down, other schools had to close down. It could have been that a bunch of schools and churches had to close down, but someone only let the HBCUs make the headline in order to up temperatures. And so I can see both sides of it, but I do think that this was something that he should have known about, being that he is a political commentator. Obviously, this is his friend and it's more personal for him, so I'm going to cut him slack on that, but anybody else, they should have known about this.
We don't know. That's what I'm saying.
Doesn't that matter?
My question is, what does any of that have to do with anybody at an HBCU? Why is 6 HBCUs going on lockdown the next day behind what happened in Utah?
Well, every school was on lockdown, and so were churches.
Not every school.
Oh, yeah.
SMU wasn't on lockdown.
Right here, just the church had to go into lockdown. Is that a race thing?
SMU wasn't, though.
I don't know if SMU was. I know they cleared out class for the day.
That goes there. They weren't on lockdown.
Do you really think that since Charlie Kirk, it has impacted the black community more than any other community?
I didn't say that. I just said, why are we...
So I think that was a little bit disingenuous. That's obviously not what he said. He wasn't saying that the black community was more impacted. He was just saying that the black community was impacted when they shouldn't have been. And obviously, again, whether or not just HBCUs got threats or someone only reported those schools getting threats to drum up tension, whatever. So I think Crowder missed the mark here, because he should have just acknowledged, hey, the shooter wasn't black, this wasn't a white-black issue, you guys should not have received threats at your schools, right? And so I think that would have been the correct response, instead of saying, hey, I didn't know about that, or kind of just downplaying the impact that something like that would have on the black community. So while he's very up to date on what is happening to conservative, I do think that he would benefit from paying attention to what's going on in other communities, so that he has a full picture and he's more prepared in that sense to talk about this issue with black people, especially if you're talking about how white people currently feel about what's going on in society. One other thing that I want to talk about that I found interesting was that Crowder is basically saying towards the end of this interview that he's on the kill list. People are trying to kill him and Charlie because of their views and all of that stuff, and obviously other conservative commentators as well. And I don't think that the average person knows what it feels like to sit across from someone like that, because when he said that, someone brought up, oh, well, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, yes, there were black people who were in his exact situation. They were killed for their thoughts, their opinions, and their influence. And so it is really crazy in modern times to sit next to someone or sit across from someone who is in that exact position, because you wouldn't really think that happens in today's world, but obviously it does. And so what's also interesting is that he's saying he's on the kill list, and you guys are sitting around him right now. I would be freaked out, because if people are trying to get to him, you are obviously putting yourself in danger by being around him. And so that tells you, one, how dangerous it is to have a political opinion, to speak your mind, to go against what other people think, and then the position that puts other people who are engaging with you in, if people will get at you to get to them, right? And so that's just really crazy and wild. And I don't think that the average person understands that or thinks about it like that. Alrighty, so that's the end of this video. Hopefully you enjoyed part 2. So let me know what your thoughts were on part 1 and part 2. Did part 2 change your opinion of part 1? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.